The ocean. You probably have fond memories of going to the beach on a hot summer day, enjoying the sound of waves, and unwantedly getting a taste of some salty ocean water. But what if I told you that the ocean is changing right in front of our eyes? That the seemingly unchangeable ocean is turning into Sprite? And I mean like a pre-opened bottle that you brought to the beach and you forgot in the backpack. Kinda carbonated, kinda sour, kinda warm. Yeah, not the good kind. Okay, I know that's a weird claim, but it's really technically accurate. And it's creating a whole myriad of problems for marine life and the earth as a whole. And this is where Captura comes in, a California startup funded by Elon. They just raised $46 million to solve this exact problem. Let's take a deepish dive into this.
Deepish.
So let me introduce you to the main suspect of this ocean spritification. And who other than CO2, the final boss of climate change. Ever since mankind first discovered the power of ancient dinosaur fluids, we became super lazy and started relying on CO2 emitting machines to do just about everything. I mean, nowadays, we don't just exercise by going for a run outside. No, that's boring. We drive ourselves over to the nearest gym and we run on an electric spinning machine in a perfectly air-conditioned and brightly lit room. But we already know this sort of modern day living is unsustainable. So countries have been making emission agreements and holding environmental conferences for years now. But that seems to be doing just as good as nothing. In fact, we've somehow managed to steadily increase our CO2 emissions every year, releasing close to 40 billion metric tons in 2023 alone. To put that in perspective, if you're watching this inside of a car, that's about the weight of 20 million cars. But let me take one step back and ask you something fundamental. What do you actually imagine when you hear the word CO2 emissions? Do you think of the daily commuters sitting endlessly in traffic? Or shady factories pumping out useless consumables? Or maybe you think of the billionaires laughing around in their private jets? In any case, I think the majority of us think of CO2 emissions as this evil gas that machines release, and it floats around in the air for us to breathe in, right? Well, let me blow your mind a little bit. Did you know that only about 40% of the CO2 that we release stays in the atmosphere? So then take a guess where much of the rest of it goes. Yeah, it goes right into the ocean. The ocean and the atmosphere has always had this close relationship of giving and receiving CO2 from each other. And in fact, up until the Industrial Revolution, the ocean used to feed CO2 to the atmosphere to keep an equilibrium. Obviously, that relationship has reversed since, and the ocean has been acting as a major CO2 sink for many decades now. But now with the record-breaking amount of CO2 being pumped out every year, this natural cycle is starting to fall apart. The ocean can only take so much CO2, and it's starting to lose its ability to take in any more CO2 than it already has. And you see why that could be a problem. And to make things even worse, once the CO2 is sucked into the ocean, much of it chemically reacts with the ocean water, creating this thing called carbonic acids. And this is causing the waters to become more acidic, resulting in a phenomenon called ocean acidification. Ocean acidity has increased by 0.1 pH in the past 200 years. And while this doesn't sound like much, since pH is represented as a logarithm, a 0.1 pH increase actually translates to a 30% increase in ocean acidity. I don't think I need to explain why all this carbonation and acidification is horrible for the ocean. The ocean's ability to absorb CO2 is coming close to the limit, meaning that soon enough, that 40 billion metric tons of CO2 will now just hang around in the atmosphere with nowhere to go. And the acidification, as you can imagine, is so destructive to marine life. It's literally dismantling coral reefs and shellfish. I mean, take a look at this shell dissolving in the ocean water. And this is bound to cause a major disruption in the marine food chain. So I guess RIP to your sushi nights. So I hope you see my metaphor now about the Sprite bottle. The ocean water is getting more carbonated and more acidic as humans continue to carry on with their modern lives. And this is exactly the problem that Captura is trying to solve. But to really understand what Captura is doing, we need to first catch up with the trendy startup world of carbon capturing. And to be more precise, I'm talking about the DACs, or direct air capture. You've probably already heard the term or seen it in the media, but DAC is this radically simple idea of using a giant air purifier to filter out the CO2 directly from the air. And while the basic idea is quite simple, there are so many startups in this field now, with over 170 of them just from this list alone. And they are each claiming that their filter or process is revolutionary and game-changing. And as it stands, there are now a few kiloton projects under construction, with the biggest one being built in Iceland by the startup Climeworks. They're kind of the OGs in the world of DAC, with people like Bill Gates investing heavy on the startup.
Yes!
But all the publicity aside, what you don't see from these catchy headlines and impressive project announcements is the questionable efficiencies of DACs. I mean, think about it. As I mentioned before, most of the CO2 that we release is not even in the atmosphere. And here's a little pop quiz for you. Take a guess how much of the air is even made of CO2. I'll give you a second. Wrong. The answer is E, 0.04%. I mean, what? This means that almost all the energy used for DACs is just lost circulating the air around instead of doing what it's supposed to do, capturing CO2. Now, I'm no scientist, but that sounds pretty inefficient to me. And Captura thinks so too. Okay, so finally we can talk about Captura. Captura was founded by two material scientists from Caltech, CX Xiang and Harry Atwater. These two renowned scientists have been working on things like super efficient solar panels and solar fuels that can turn sunlight directly into fuels. When they saw the emerging trend of DAC startups, they quickly noticed the possible inefficiencies, and they had an idea. What if we just take the DAC concept and bring it right into the ocean, where all the CO2's at? They imagined a system that takes advantage of the ocean's natural ability to absorb CO2, and just help bring that natural cycle back to its full potential. And this way, the system doesn't have to worry about concentrating the CO2 like DACs, making the whole operation so much more efficient. Now, this is of course easier said than done. For one, as mentioned before, once CO2 enters the ocean, it chemically reacts with the water and it gets stored in forms other than gaseous CO2. And that makes it much more complicated than just filtering out the CO2 molecules from the air. Luckily, as leading experts in the field of electrochemistry and material science, they had the ability to make this idea work. And their invention, rightfully named DOC, or direct ocean capture, basically takes the process of ocean acidification and reverse engineers it to their advantage. Let me explain how it works. This is their CO2 capturing machine. It first sucks in ocean water, and then it splits it into the main pipe and then the subpipe. The water in the subpipe gets turned into an acidic part and a basic part through a technique called electrodialysis. Then, it adds back the acidic part into the main pipe, which lowers the pH of that water. Now for nature to do its job. As you can see in this graph, the more acidic the water is, the more the carbonic acids turn back into CO2. Yeah, chemistry is crazy. From there, it's pretty simple. It uses their proprietary membrane to efficiently capture the floating CO2. And finally, the basic water is added back from the subpipe, and we end up with a decarbonized and perfectly pH'd ocean water, ready to be released right back into the great ocean. Now, the real magic of this system is in their proprietary membranes. The graphene-enhanced membrane was developed by the founders at Caltech, and it makes the water splitting part and the CO2 separating part of the system super efficient. In addition, the process is sustainable as it gets because it only needs ocean water and renewable energy as inputs. There's no need for chemical additives or traditional fuels, making the whole process also cost-effective. And you might wonder, what the hell do they do with the CO2 once they capture it? And the mainstream solution to that question is carbon sequestration, which is a method of permanently storing CO2 deep underground, where it won't affect the environment. But Captura doesn't stop there. They're developing an electrochemical system that can turn the captured CO2 directly into sustainable fuels, which can then be used for planes and ships, and fully closing the carbon cycle. So as you can see, Captura is thorough when it comes to their technology. Starting with the inherently more efficient environment to capture CO2 in, to their proprietary system that is not only efficient but also cost effective. And they're even trying to recycle the CO2 that they capture. So Captura's technology seems one step ahead of the rest of the carbon capturing crowd. Let's now take a closer look at their business and uncover the dark secrets of the carbon capturing ecosystem. So now that we've looked at their technology and vision, let's see how they built a business around the invention. Along with the two founders acting as the CTO and CSO, they've recruited Steve Oldham to be their CEO. The interesting thing about this appointment is that Steve used to be the CEO of Carbon Engineering, which is one of the biggest DAC startups that I mentioned before. If that doesn't tell you the potential of ocean capturing, I'm not sure what will. As for their funding, they've raised $46 million, mainly from multinationals such as Aramco, Japan Airlines, and National Grid, to name a few. But they've also received $1 million from X Prize, which is a competition funded by Elon to find the best carbon capturing tech in the world. And as of 2024, they've successfully piloted a 1-ton system and a 100-ton system in California. And they're now developing their final 1 kiloton pilot system on the coast of Norway, working with Equinor, the Norwegian state-owned petrol company. Wait a second. You might see something a little sus about these investors and partnerships. Carbon capturing startup working so closely with their supposed to be enemies? And this is the hidden secret of the carbon capturing ecosystem. All these carbon capturing startups are mainly funded by big oil. Think about it. How do you think companies like Captura plan on making money if they're simply doing something that's just like good for the world? I mean, that doesn't make anyone reach into their wallets, right? The answer is carbon credits. As regulations around carbon emission keep getting stricter, big oil and other carbon-dependent industries have been looking for an easy way out of this problem. And carbon credits was that fix. It allows companies to purchase credits from carbon-negative issuers, such as these carbon capturing startups. And they can use these credits to simply subtract the amount purchased from their own emissions. And I don't need to tell you why critics think carbon credits are all just a scammy loophole for these corporations. And to make things even more suspicious, some big oils are planning to purchase the recovered CO2 from these startups. Why? To use to pump out more oil from the ground. I mean, this conspiracy is endless, so I'll just leave it at that for now. I don't want to be found dead in an oil field or something. And now to point out a few criticisms about Captura specifically. Some skeptics are pointing out the possibilities that their system will further disrupt sea life. They're worried about increased industrial activity in the ocean, as well as the possibility of the system filtering out planktons, which are also crucial for a healthy marine environment. But with everything considered, I think Captura has a very strong outlook. It's a startup led by scientists, which I think is always how it should be. And they have a proprietary technology, which provides them with a pretty big moat. Combine that with the questionable but powerful fundings from multinational corporations, you get a winner with the potential to really solve problems that affect the entire planet. As long as we as a humanity keep releasing CO2 into the air at the pace we have been, they should have endless business opportunities far, far into the future. Now, time for my rating. Instead of giving these startups a numerical rating, I thought giving them an emoji would be a funnier idea. So, Captura gets a blue heart emoji for trying to save the ocean. Thank you all for watching, and hope to see you next month, if I can get this video done.